Hi, welcome and welcome back. This is the New in Review coming to you today with another reading from Bearing the Cross. This is my 1 year community read on this channel, and I'm doing it in 30-minute increments, so you'll be able to take it in and digest. How I am reading the book is I'm not reading it straight through. I will have my critiques and my opinions on certain things that I run across. So I'll be sharing it with you as I go along. But also, while you're here, this is episode 10. So if this is your first time here, go back and listen to um, episodes 1 through 9. And then after this episode, I will be doing the live, which will more likely be the first day of 2026. Now, while I'm recording, we're still in December, so January 2026, I will be doing my first live. However, there will be other episodes also uploaded if you want to listen to those as well. However, during the live, I'll just be discussing episodes 1 through 9. So I hope I got all of that in. But yeah, so while you're here, click subscribe and let's get into this. So previously, King was in his last years at Crozier. It was a seminary school, and he really got into the liberal biblical philosophies of various theologians. So and that's where we that's where the that's where we ended off at. One of his instructors, and let me see if I get the name right, Professor George W. Davis. He was definitely into the philosophy of I mean, not into the philosophy, but he was definitely intrigued by his style of learning, and thus, he took a bulk of his classes with that particular professor. In the end, Davis had evaluated King, and he said he was exceptional, very personable. He makes a good impression in the public speaking realm, a person of high character, and he would be an excellent minister and a teacher. And that's where we left off. So we're going to get into um, the next part. So I'm about to read right now. Um, the arguments in Niebuhr and the friendly prodding of Smith moved King away from his earlier attachment to the optimism that pervaded not only in Rauschenbach's social gossip, but indeed all of the I could never say this word, you guys. Okay, evangelical liberalism that George Davis had suffused with him. Looking back, King later confessed that he had come absolutely convinced of the natural goodness of man and the natural power of human reasoning. Niebuhr's most persuasive realism, however, showed him the complexities of human motives and the reality of sin on every level of man's existence. Clearly, Christian love alone could not defeat injustice and achieve social change. And that was like one thing that really stuck out to me, because there's this sense that if you read the Bible, if you go to church, that should be good enough. But there's not enough love that people are definitely showing or partaking in to eradicate injustice, and and embracing social change. And that social change comes from centuries of people choosing not to walk the path that you have set for them or society set for them, but a different path for themselves. We should always be tolerance of other people's change, as long as it's not affecting our person. So Yeah, we have a lot of work to do, but I love that part where he talked about Christian love alone cannot defeat injustice and achieve social change. It cannot. It's like the pastor who would not associate with you because you are transgender or you are bisexual or you are, gay or lesbian. That has nothing to do, with being a Christian. It has nothing to do with injustice, deciding that I'm going to characterize you because you come from a particular social group or because of your sex or because of your family social status. So we have a lot of work to do as people, you guys. King pondered just what greater social injustice might entail. One key area was economics, and King was becoming increasingly hostile towards capitalism and its resilience on the profit motives. Yeah. In Smith's fall class, King presented an excellent and positive report on R.A. Tawney's classic Marxist study, Religion and the Rise of Capitalism. In another paper, King spoke about my anti-capitalistic feelings. Reverend Barber, calling his long conversations with King at the time, that King thought that capitalistic systems was predicated on exploitation and prejudice, poverty, and that we wouldn't solve these problems until we got a new social order. And this was the young M.L. King, right? And that is going to be a forever issue because the hierarchy, the goal is to pit us against each other, but we're all swimming in the same pool. King wondered how improvement could be made. He had heard Musk urge the pacifist approach. Several months later, he heard Howard University President Mordecai Johnson just back from a trip to India, describe how the nonviolent of Mahatma Gandhi had brought about revolutionary changes in Indian society. However, King had serious doubts about pacifism and nonviolence, even though the Johnson lecture spurred a new interest in Gandhi in the fall of 1950. At the same time, he was debating Rauschenbach's and Niebuhr with Smith. King read extensively on Gandhi in George Davis's Psychology of Religion course. King's doubts were expressed clearly in a paper he submitted to Smith, picking up on a recent article in the Crozier Quarterly by political theorist John H. Howell, which attacked Musk's pacifism. King argued that Gandhi's success in India did not mean that the pacifist approach would work everywhere, and we already know that it doesn't, you guys. Failed to recognize the sinfulness of man. Though they focused on the problem of war and violence, they did not appreciate that those were merely symptoms of man's sinfulness. Since man is so often sinful, King wrote, there must be some coercion to keep man from injuring his fellows. Aggression and injustice must be resisted, not tolerated, though the respondent must not seek revenge. And this is where, this deep understanding of nonviolence came from, by him pondering these questions and really breaking down the anatomy, the emotional anatomy of man, right? And how one chain affects the other, right? This person is violent towards me, but we would not, we would not get anywhere with violence versus violence. Where um, Malcolm X, his theory was completely, and I'm not going to say the polar opposite, but at the same time, um, Malcolm, I will meet you where you're at. Where King was like, well, I'm going to rise above what you're saying, and we're going to come back and talk about it and be more rational about it. So there are ways of addressing those type of injustices. 7 years later, looking back upon the evolution of his thought, King remarked that when I was in the theology school, I thought the only way we could have solved problems of segregation was an armed revolt. King's commitment to the life of the mind, plus a superb academic record, led his professors to suggest that he pursue doctoral studies in theology. They wrote enthusiastic recommendations for King with Dean Charles E. Batten, terming him one of the most brilliant students we've had at Crozier. Someone who was interested in social action and a real leader, while possessing a keen mind which both analytically and constructively creative. Another instructor called King the outstanding student in his class, and Morton S. Elslin, perhaps Crozier's most illustrious professor, recommended King without qualifications as a very competent student, conscientious, industrious, and with more than visual insight. Eslin noted King's success as a student body president, despite Crozier's largely Southern population, and observed that he is entirely free from those somewhat annoying qualities which some men of his race acquire when they find themselves in a distinctly higher percentage in their group. Inslee added that so far as his moral character is concerned, there is no need of any qualification, at least so far as I know. And I think that every few details of that sort has escaped me. I underlined that, and I'm trying to remember why I underlined it because I didn't put a note by it. But here's the thing: when people decide that, you qualify because you are an anomaly from your entire group of people, whether it's black or whether it's another race man of people, I think that those prejudices, it blinds us because yes, I don't care what nobody think. Everyone does some form of group thinking, but when you're pitting a certain type of personality or a way of thinking towards a whole race of people, that is that is when the enemy says, you know what I say and what I believe is right. And King, I'm glad he was very diligent at attempting to critically think about his upbringings as opposed to his newfound understanding and studying about religion and other philosophies. And so, even with all of that, King took that with him, and he still became a race man for his people. So let's get back to the reading. King was accepted to several doctoral programs: Yale, Edinburgh, and Scotland, and Boston University schools of theology. And after pondering the choice, decided upon Boston. One of the major professors there was Edgar S. Brightman. a man George Davis highly recommended, and whose book, A Philosophy of Religion, has been a main text in two courses King had taken with Davis. When King graduated from Crozer in 1951, he was valedictorian of the class and received the school's major prize, annual prize, a $1,200 award to support his further study. He was pleased, although he hinted that 7 years of higher education was plenty for a young man who would be coming back sooner or later to join his father as co-pastor. ML, who had learned long before that he never ever won an argument with his daddy, simply nodded and uttered his standard non-committal remark. Oh yes, ML once again spent a summer back at Ebenezer assisting his father before setting out in September for Boston for his next challenge in a new green Chevrolet, a present from his parents for his success at Crozer. I will say, King situation with his family was a little different because financially the stage was already kind of set for him, to not have to really worry about a lot of financial stresses. And so with that being freed up, um, in, 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 in a lot of ways, it allowed him to explore higher education and other avenues of addressing of or tackling the subject we call religion. Not so much Christianity, but religion. ML found a small apartment on the St. Bartholomew Street in Boston and began the rigor of a fall load of graduate courses. Both Professor Brightman and other principal members of the Boston faculty, such as L. Harold D. Wolf and Peter Bacolti, were advocates of a theological view known as personalism, which King had been introduced at Crozer by George Davis. Personalism, as the name suggested, held to the human personality, i.e., all individual persons, was the ultimate intrinsic value in the world. I underlined that, you guys. So this is why it's always good to go back and reread. And the goal of annotating is to, put something right there so you can remember it. Personalism, as the name suggested, held the human personality. Am I rereading? Some of King's own strong attraction to the philosophy was rooted in one of his major corollaries. If the dignity and worth of all human possibilities was the ultimate value of the world, racial segregation and discrimination were amongst the world's most evil. In his first year at Boston, ML continued to wrestle with the question Niebuhr had raised for him a year earlier. Looking back on Crozer, King realized that he still accepted much of Davis's optimistic liberalism, as well as Smith's Niebuhrian realism. If he could trace his attraction to optimism back to the familial setting, his attraction to realism might be similar. For it may root back a certain experience that I in the South with a vicious race problem. Some of the experiences that I encountered there made it difficult for me to believe in the essential goodness of man. And remember, if you listen to the other chapters, how He encountered like those two experiences when his friend, when he was like maybe 5 or 6, white boy, his father told him that he couldn't play with ML anymore. And then the second time, when he was doing he went on a trip with his teacher for some type of speech debate, and they were made to stand up on the bus for 7 hours, to give their seat to white passengers. So, and these happened in his childhood. So, those things that sticks, like it stays there with us, right? Um, it give us a lifetime, to try to figure the why the why, people can be so hateful and they don't understand their own hate. mm. In the middle school, for his first year at Boston, King and an old Morehouse friend, Philip Lunan, now a distinctive student, rented an apartment on Massachusetts Avenue. King's social contact expanded further, aided by his car, a rarity for a graduate student, and his wardrobe of fine suits, with his friends envied and teased about him. He was the one that got most people together. The one friend recalled, he would scout all the schools to find the best looking black girls and would pass on tips to others. But he picked out the best ones for himself. He just loved to party. He loved to enjoy his life. That friend remembered, but King complained to one old friend, Mrs. Mary Powell, a student at the New England Conservatory of Music, that when the women he was meeting in Boston were not equally as southern ones he had known. Mrs. Powell offered to introduce him to a fellow student at the conservatory, Coretta Scott, an Alabama native who had graduated from Ohio Echnot College the previous year. King asked Powell for her phone number, and that night he had called and asked Coretta Scott for a date. He did his best to impress her, saying that grand things he had heard about her from Mary Powell. Um, I'm sorry, you guys. I'm losing concentration. As Coretta candidly recalled, in some years later, he had quite a line. He was a typical man, smoothness, jive. Some of it I had never heard of in my life. It was what I call intellectual jive. Nevertheless, she was touched by King's fulsome and sight unseen compliments. I kind of enjoyed it and agreed to see him for lunch the next day. When King picked her up, the first thing that struck Coretta was his size. This little man, who was so short. I looked at him and thought to myself, he doesn't look like much. As King spoke, though, her impression of him improved. When he talked, he just radiated so much charm. He became much better looking as he talked. King was quite Queen King was quite taken with Coretta Scott. She had all the qualities he told her that he was looking for in a wife. Though she dismissed such talk, she agreed to see him again. I'm gonna hold this up a little bit because I don't want to have my head down like this while I'm talking to you guys. So we're into the last few minutes. Throughout the early months of 1951, Coretta, 1951, King and Coretta Scott saw each other regularly. Sometimes he would visit her apartment where a number of black graduate students were gathered each week to discuss philosophical questions. King had initiated the meetings and asserted his leadership wherever someone, such as Lunan, sought to challenge him. When Martin and Coretta went out, they often discussed politics and race. I remember talking. I remember him talking. Coretta said later in recalling those days about his concerns for the masses. He talked about the unequal distribution of wealth, and he said it's so unfair that a small percentage of the population could control all the wealth. And that brings me to the Poor People Campaign, but we will talk about that in later chapters. He felt that there could be more equitable distribution of wealth. She recalled that he said that my old man is a capitalist, and I don't believe in capitalism as it is practiced in the United States. Now, not to say he don't believe in, someone earning, money for, earning a living. It's just the message behind capitalism and how it displaces or it puts people in a certain social status if you do, oh, excuse me, you guys, if you do have or if you don't have the means. So, let me get back to this. Martin, felt that it was very unjust, and he said to his father's love of money, and thought only about his own family, not about the rest of humanity. Martin made those same attitudes clear to his father when he visited Atlanta. Though he avoided heated clashes with him, Daddy King said later about ML. At the same time, politically, he often seemed to be drifting away from the basis of capitalism and Western democracy that I felt very strong about. As King's thinking on American society evolved, his theological understanding also continued to grow. In his first year, he took Professor Brightman's basic course, Philosophy of Religion, where he was exposed both to the writings and to the personalists to those ideas of major thinkers. Much of Martin's time was spent preparing papers such as The Personalism of J.M.E., MacTaggart Under Criticism, Karl Barth's Conception of God, and Contemporary Continental Theology. Now, when I first read that, I did look up the papers, and they do exist. So if I'm able to find them, I'll probably try to link them below. But if I don't, I will put the titles of the papers because they are archived. During the summer of 1952, King returned to Atlanta to assist his father at Ebenezer in Boston. He was preaching occasionally at Roxbury 12th Baptist Church, where he was pastored by a family friend. But in Atlanta, ML took to the pulpit almost every week. In August, Coretta came to visit to meet Daddy and Mrs. King. She knew from Mary Powell, with whom she stayed in Atlanta, that Martin had continued to see other women, and that there was a family assumption, especially on Daddy King's part, that Martin would marry a home girl. Though Coretta was impressed to hear Martin in his home church, she found the King family greeting cool. Back in Boston, the fall, Martin and Coretta continued to see each other regularly. At the university, King's most important course was a 2-semester seminar G.W.F. Hegel with Professor Brittman, who was struck down by terminal illnesses earlier that first term. Peter Bacotti, who took over the class, recalled that King was usually quiet in class, but had been extremely interested in Hegel's discussion of how a master could become so dependent upon a slave that the slave could assume the dominant role in the relationship. Now I'm a little over the 30-minute mark, so let me hurry up. But Hegel, fascinated by the dialectical method of the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, ASL, Harold D. Wolf, another of King's professors, later observed, regardless of the subject matter, King never tried of moving. King never tired of moving from one-sided thesis to a corrective but one-sided antithesis, and finally a more coherent thesis beyond both. King's new attraction to the Hegelian dialectical method was reflected in his writings. In a paper where he tackled the arguments made by Niebuhr, now he argued that one must adopt both the ethical love and the emphasis of Rauschenbach and the realist stress upon political power. And that will end it. I'm a little bit over 30, but that's okay. I will see you guys in my next reading. Bye-bye. Oh, by the way, after this reading, I will be doing a live, and I don't want to date this. So I will be doing a live the first week of January. You will see a posting in the community tab. And so hopefully I will see you there so we can discuss the first 10 chapters and go from there. So I'll see you around, and take care. Bye-bye.